And I conveyed to each of my G7 counterparts that the United States is going to do our part. America is back at the table. America is back at the table. The lack of participation in the past and full engagement was noticed significantly, not only by the leaders of those countries, but by the people in the G7 countries. And America is back in the business of leading the world alongside nations who share our most deeply held values.
Have you noticed the worldwide fear campaign being ramped up ever since world leaders arrived home from the G7 conference, which took place June 11th to 13th in Cornwall, England? In the months prior to the G7 conference, the world was returning to normal. We'd seen packed football and soccer stadiums all across the United States and Europe. We watched the NBA and Stanley Cup playoffs with 20,000 fans jammed into arenas all across Canada and the US. We watched 135,000 fans pack the Indianapolis Speedway back on May 30th, along with hundreds of other full stadiums and arenas all across the world for other sporting events. We also attended music festivals and concerts across Europe and the United States with thousands of fans in attendance. No masks were needed, no social distancing in place, and no vaccine passports required. Life was getting back to normal. Then, on May 31st, 2021, just 12 days prior to the start of the G7 conference in England, the World Health Organization officially came up with the name the Delta variant, which is a supposed new strain of the COVID-19 virus. The G7 consists of the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom, along with representatives of the European Union, and also included invited leaders this year from Australia, India, South Africa, and South Korea. Have you noticed how the Delta variant fear campaign has been at its strongest in every one of the countries that attended this year's G7 conference?
In the U.S., the rapid spread of the Delta variant is causing an incredible surge in COVID-19 cases.
With the highly transmissible Delta variant and even more transmissible lies and conspiracy theories about the vaccine being spewed all over social and other media, cases and hospitalizations are surging at an alarming rate.
My daughter is 20 years old. She's double vaccinated. She has caught the Delta variant living in London. What you're saying is that vaccination doesn't guarantee you won't catch a variant or whatever's happening with the COVID developments.
Scientists stress that more research is required, but early findings from Public Health England suggest that vaccines might not be effective in reducing the transmissibility of the Delta variant of coronavirus.
New variants are popping up all the time, but the one we're most worried about that's wreaking the havoc at the moment is the Delta variant of coronavirus.
A 2-week lockdown has been imposed in Sydney to contain an outbreak of the highly contagious COVID-19 Delta variant.
The Delta variant of the coronavirus may become a new threat to South Korea as imported cases surge in the country.
And therefore, a lot of what we witnessed in the second surge in India does owe a lot to the damage caused by the Delta variant.
Right now, Ontario is testing half of all positive cases for the Delta variant, identifying 434 cases as of its last update on June 3rd. In Western Canada, BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan are now screening all positive samples for Delta, with more than 200 cases detected in Alberta and more than 500 in BC.
Have you noticed or been made aware of the fact that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the largest independent financial supporter of the World Health Organization? The same WHO that came up with the name Delta variant, and the same Bill Gates who's been championing his vaccines as the only path out of the COVID-19 pandemic since March of 2020.
So from the very start, Bill Gates has devoted not only his time, but also his money to finding a solution.
That's right. As someone who has been involved in health initiatives around the world for years now, Gates' foundation has now contributed $450 million to the global COVID-19 response.
He famously warned about a global pandemic back in 2015 in a TED Talk. We first sat down back in April when we were just weeks into the pandemic and still figuring it out. Well, now, with at least one vaccine approved in the UK already and hopefully several green lights to come here in the US, we spoke again about where things stand and where they're going. It feels like we're in that dreaded second wave. We're in that dark winter. How are you looking at how we're handling this?
Well, it's a paradoxical situation because things are getting worse right now. And so the next 4 or 5 months actually look pretty grim unless we can really double down on our behavior. But the tools, both treatment tools like antibodies and some of these amazing vaccines, will start to roll out. And by the spring, those numbers will be big enough that certainly in the United States, it'll start to change the numbers dramatically. And we'll be headed back to normal.
Have you noticed that on July 21st, 2021, the Center for Disease Control, aka the CDC, issued a statement to the world saying the PCR test should no longer be used to test people for COVID-19 because the test can't differentiate between someone who has a cold, a flu, COVID, or the Delta variant. The CDC has essentially admitted the PCR test is useless. Have you noticed that G7 countries have no specific way to test for the Delta variant that is different than any previous COVID-19 test? There's no new technology that is able to differentiate between the Delta variant and regular COVID. They're just using the same PCR test.
How big a part of the business is COVID-19 testing at this point?
Well, last year we did in excess of $2 billion in COVID-19 testing, so it was considerable last year. We reported north of $9 billion for the total company, so it was a sizable portion of our revenues last year. And in the first half, that continued. But as we entered this year as well, Sarah, we said our COVID-19 testing business would go down as we saw the recovery, if you will, from the pandemic. And it has gone down throughout the first half. But what we've seen in the last few weeks is actually a bottoming out of our testing. And in the last couple of weeks, and we think it's related to the Delta variant, we started to see a slight increase actually in some of that COVID testing volume as well.
These G7 leaders don't want life to return to normal. They want you kept in a perpetual state of fear, worrying if the next strain of the virus is going to be more dangerous than the next. Meanwhile, each of these leaders are reveling in their unchecked powers that have been afforded to them because of the supposed so-called pandemic. The people in each of these G7 countries have allowed many of their personal rights and freedoms to be eroded into dust, all in the name of the greater good of society, because we can have more people catching COVID. Even though there's significant scientific data and information available to us after 18 months that tells us, unless you're very old, obese, and have several other serious health issues, that the likelihood of any serious health effects from catching COVID is fairly rare. In just about every G7 country, you're more likely to die in a car accident on the way to being tested for COVID than you are from COVID itself. How much longer are you going to play dumb? How much longer are you just going to rely on mainstream news to provide you with information, even though your gut is telling you something just isn't right about all of this? How much longer are you going to play along with this charade without doing any of your own research? How much longer are you going to be the ostrich with its head in the sand pretending that all of this is normal when everything in your soul tells you that it isn't? Have you noticed how common sense simply doesn't exist anymore?